Hello everyone. Since the beginning of this year, there have been thousands of articles from foreign media outlets predicting the imminent collapse of Beijing's economy. They cite similarities between China's current situation and past economic crises in the United States. However, upon closer inspection, we see that China is not as prone to crisis as the US. Let's explore why this is the case. Starting in the 1990s, China experienced an economic boom that seemed like a miracle, with average growth over 10% per year. By 2009, they had overtaken the US as the world's largest manufacturer. Business was thriving and prosperity was widespread. Confidence in success was higher than fear of bankruptcy. As a result, from bankers to investors, there was excessive optimism. One eagerly lent money while the other happily borrowed as much as possible. To date, the total amount of loans made by Chinese financial institutions has reached the staggering figure of $51.87 trillion, equivalent to 341% of GDP. Much of this was used by investors to speculate on real estate as prices rose. The more people participated, the more demand and prices increased. By 2020, real estate in major Chinese cities like Shenzhen and Shanghai had become 4 times more expensive than New York. However, no boom can last indefinitely. Economic growth and household incomes could not keep pace with the excessive price increases. At some point, specifically now, real estate prices in many Chinese cities have far surpassed what average people can afford. With slowing economic conditions, investors are hesitant to buy property. This has gradually brought prices back down to realistic levels. In this situation, many banks and financial institutions face risk because most of the collateral for their loans was real estate. When prices fall below the amount borrowed, the system collapses. For example, Biden had land worth $1 billion which he used as collateral to borrow $900 million from a bank in 2022. By 2023, prices had plunged a massive 20%, so his land was only worth $800 million. Now even if Biden had $900 million to repay the bank, he would not do it since that amount could buy more land than what he had put up as collateral initially. As a result, the bank would take his land to cover the $100 million loss. When many loans are like Biden's, banks will certainly go bankrupt. This is called lax collateral or subprime lending standards. Recently, 2 rural banks in China, Liaoyang and Taizhou in Liaoning province, declared bankruptcy. Dozens of other financial institutions also face difficulties, with total losses on collateralized loans up to $350 billion. When this happens, depositors start worrying and rush to withdraw funds from any shaky financial institution. Having to pay back all deposits is equivalent to bankruptcy. This is the situation China faces now, with dozens of banks on the verge of collapse, very similar to the Great Depression in the US during the 1930s and 2008. How have they addressed this? Let's first review the most recent US economic crisis in 2008. The situation was like China's today. Banks had little money because customers rushed to withdraw funds. Initially, the Federal Reserve stood by idly, partly because they felt it was normal for reckless private banks to fail, and partly because they feared increasing inflation. As a result, small banks failed one after another, disrupting payments and halting lending in many areas, plunging local economies into an abyss. The Fed's inaction later caused the 4th largest U.S. bank, Lehman Brothers, to also collapse. Millions lost jobs and economic activities were severely disrupted. Finally, the Fed realized its mistake and provided funds to banks in similar distress, helping them pay withdrawing customers and preventing systemic failure. However, the delayed response meant the U.S. economy took 10 years to recover. Now let's look at China's solution. It's quite simple. They learned from the U.S. experiences. At the first signs of instability early this year, China's central bank immediately lowered interest rates and injected capital into troubled branches, enabling them to promptly repay panicking customers. This is normal since most Chinese banks are state-owned. They have a responsibility to support their branches. Moreover, Beijing's decisive actions stem from another reason. Their effective control over inflation in past years means increasing money supply to banks will not necessarily worsen conditions, unlike the situation facing the Federal Reserve, where they have to be very cautious about rising inflation. However, this is not to say China's economy is smoothly developing. There are many challenges due to the following factors. Firstly, Excessively strict zero-COVID controls have disrupted manufacturing and services, while causing some loss of lives and small-scale social unrest. Secondly, the real estate sector, accounting for 22–29% of GDP, shows signs of decline as more units are built but fewer people can buy them given the disconnect between prices and average incomes. At the same time, the general economic situation is shakier than the past decade, making investors wary. According to Harvard University professor Kenneth Rogoff and IMF expert Dr. Yuan Chen, around 20% of new housing in China is vacant. This has led many developers into mounting debt, forcing them to rely on government venture capital. Thirdly, as the world's largest exporter, China depends on major economies that now face slower growth due to high energy and food inflation. Last month, their exports unexpectedly dropped 8.7% and are expected to weaken further this month. However, compared to the US and Europe, China currently has relatively low inflation at 2.1%. Despite present challenges, the IMF forecasts their economy will still grow around 3.3% this year, which is moderately good news for many other countries. The reason is that if giants like China or the US face crisis, it would destabilize the entire world.